Thank you. This is so exciting, everything going on in there. It's really nice to see it being put in practice. So I'm going to do this for the camera, and it'll be online. But it's... I just thought to share a bit of how I see that the strength of circus and the way we're being creative with circus, how the same things that we think of when we are creative with circus, we can use about how we're creative about injury prevention, around working around restrictions, around how we work with our body and the physicalities we have. I'm thinking some of it is like very straightforward, but then I thought it's better to sort of go through it and then see what people think is of interest or not. So I've started training in '95, and like Silvia was saying before, I worked through so many different injuries. I think everyone has, but along the way, how do you deal with injuries, and how do you keep performing? How do you change your practice? How do you keep working with it? I have to start by saying I'm a total fraud. I'm not performing anymore because of my injuries. So there's only so far you can work around it. I think when the pain becomes a constant companion, you go, do you know what? Enough is enough. But all the ways that all the things that I've applied while I was a performer have been really useful for me when I transferred to become a choreographer and a director, and also as a teacher. So it's all sort of have worked one thing into another. So one of the things I always want to go back to is like what circus is about, and the fact of like what's people's fascination with circus. And I still haven't really cracked exactly what it is that makes circus so amazing, but some of the things I just put down. So it's this is sort of looking at really traditional where it comes from as well. It's the different. It's something that's different from what the audience are themselves, or different from what they used to see. It's the incredible. It's the freaks. I mean, it used to be a freak show, sideshow, used to be part of traditional circus. So it's always, I find that like quite good to think about when you feel like you can only hobble down on one leg and go like, well, actually, we used to come and see us. Do you know what I mean? We don't have to be perfect. We're not. We don't have to think that we have to fit into a certain mold. I'm not saying there's a lot of issues that could be discussed about the freak show. I'm not saying it's about the freak show or not, but we don't have to think that we have to be a certain way to be a circus performer. You can be whatever and be a circus performer. So sort of remembering that history of where it's coming from. It used to be a bit of, it used to be the outfits rather than the perfection that some circuses today are. It's the dreams. For me, I think, and for many people, the romantic idea of circus is a sort of dream-like things. It's circus. What fascinates with circus, I think, is the things we thought were impossible, and the things that, as an audience, you can't do. So, I will talk a bit more about what that means. But I think when they come there, they want to see something that they didn't expect to see. But what that is can vary in so many ways, and they will. And there's so many ways we can control that. So I'll go on. I think I'll explain it. We have to remember that circus is different from sports. There isn't preset rules about how it has to be presented. There isn't like set moves, like in gymnastics, where you have to do certain set moves. And if you can't do, whatever the double somersault, whatever you want to, you can't do a walkover in a straight line. Then you can't compete on certain levels. But it's not like that in circus. The important thing is that we do something that's impressive to the audience. But if I can't, nobody expects me that I have to do a forward walkover. I can do whatever I want as long as it's impressive or fascinates the audience in some way. There's no physical restrictions, as in, if you look at sports, if you look at boxing, you would have to weigh between 61 and 65 kilograms to be within that level of the competition. There's nothing like that. It's not that you have to be of a certain body type to be allowed to compete. Circus isn't a competition. I know there are circus competitions, but it's not that thing. It's no one says that if you're not this body, then you can't be a circus performer. So I think there's a lot. When we start training, it's easy to feel like we have to be a certain things, but actually circus gives us the freedom to not be a certain things. We can invent what we are. It's down to the audience taste. It's not a jury setting points, and my favorite bit about circus is that cheating is allowed. You know, you can cheat. You can achieve tricks in so many different ways. And Mimbre sort of came out of cheating. Not really, but when we started doing acrobalance together, there were several things we could not do as a duet, because we just weren't strong enough, or because we had quite similar size. Me and Emma were of quite similar weight, very different body shapes, but quite similar weight. And that restricted, you know, there were some tricks that was much harder to do that way. But then we recruited Sylvia and started working as trio, and suddenly we were like, oh, okay, well, what if we do that trick, but the third person is supporting it in a way that looks aesthetically pleasing, but still, physically, is cheating, and enables us to do tricks that we couldn't do in just twos. And then people were like, oh, that looks really interesting. What sort of trick is that? And we were like, well, it's just a hand-to-hand, but we're cheating it. But it looked different. So we started inventing moves sort of out of that necessity. And then, you know, it's just feet to feet, standing on feet. And there is a typical way you go, you know, facing each other, and then you roll down, and the other person rolls up, standing on the feet. And for some reason, we absolutely couldn't do that. Did loads of more advanced things, but we could not get the timing of that. But we said, oh, but, you know, how do we do it with the third person? So we invented a really convoluted way of, I think Sylvia went into a handstand, and then Emma pulled her over their back to place her feet on my feet, and then she rolled up there, and then she came standing. And again, it was just a way of going, how do we go into it differently? And people came up and went, oh, that's really interesting, I did not all see that coming. And it literally was just because there was a move we couldn't do, but it sort of ended up creating a style of how we performed that then got appreciated, and that we found had ropes, they had life, and we continued touring and performing with. I still teach that way of getting into foot to foot when we teach students as a way of saying, let's break out of the mold, you know, try this way in, and now you invent another way in. And what I'm trying to get at with that is that if you have an injury, and I'm not talking about acute injuries, that's very different. You got an acute injury, lie down or go and check it out and make sure you haven't got something broken. I'm talking about long-term injuries or restrictions or weaknesses or disabilities. But if you have one and go, I can't do that move, instead of just going, okay, so I can't do it, look at what do you need to be able to do it. Could it be cheated? Could you create a special equipment that makes you able to do it? Could you use the other performers to be able to do it? Instead of hammering ourselves into the ground, let's use the creativity of finding different ways of approaching things. If something is painful, what can you do? How can you use the show, all the different things we put around to make it not painful? So sort of like not being set that things have to do a certain way, and I think that's a big difference certainly from sports, but also from dance to some extent, maybe totally depending on what area of dance. But I think there's maybe a little bit more set that like dancers, should look like this or should look like that. Although a lot of the most interesting dance I see is the things that doesn't look like your stereotypical dance body. But I think circus has always been quite a variety of bodies and shapes and approaches, and that's our strength. So this was just some thoughts, because I realized, like I said, when dealing with an injury, a restriction, something that changes the way that you can work with your body, we're rarely just in a place where we go like, oh, I can't use my right arm. Well, okay, let's just try to find a different way. Because it's not only the fact that you can't use the right arm, you're dealing with pain, you're often dealing with economical stress that comes with it. You go, oh my God, I can't use my right arm, I can't do that gig, how am I going to pay the rent, etc. It's a bit of an identification crisis. I've always, that's my best trick, doing my right arm, one-hand handstand. And suddenly you can't identify yourself as an acrobat, but that's what you identify, that's what you introduce yourself as. And suddenly you go, yeah, I'm an acrobat, I can't actually do anything at the moment. It's quite big psychological that I can't even, really I don't know that much about it, apart from I know how much it changes for the state of where your brain is. And that's not necessarily a good place where you go, okay, I'm going to be creative now. And also there's the social network. So there's been recently a thesis written by Tim, don't know his surname, but he's here. And he was interviewing a whole lot of circus performers who've been injured and what impact that has had on them. And he was going through these things. And social network was one of them, that actually for a lot of circus performers going in training, that's part of like your friendships, your world. And when you can't go in training, suddenly you feel cut off from that. So basically, I was just sort of like going, it's not easy. I can come with some thoughts, and these are just my thoughts and experiences on how you deal with injuries. But it's, I'm not one of, I think there's so many different factors that we have to recognize and then go, okay. There's also the other side of it. It's one thing of, having worked with, having been able to do something, then you can't do it anymore, and to deal with that. But the other thing is, how do we teach people who are total beginners, who have not used their bodies in a physical way before, or people with disabilities or physical restrictions? How can we share the exhilaration of circus? Because I do think it's like amazing, that feeling when you can do a trick for the first time. How do we share it with people regardless of their physical starting points? And for me, that journey has been quite connected, because by me not being able to do something with the left hand, I had to find different ways of doing it. And then when I teach people and they say, I can't do something on this foot, the same sort of strategies I used around my injuries, I can use when teaching people. And also to recognize that for somebody to, when teaching a handstand, to teach a kid a handstand, it takes a long time to get really solid handstand. But that feeling of having achieved something, we do, I'll go over here, just going, feet here, hands, you can do the whole external rotation, everything, but you go up here, and for them, this, that's a handstand. So their sense of achieving something is like, they've done a handstand! They go home and tell their parents, I did a handstand! And I think something like that I can still teach with the right technique, whereas if it's just kicking up this way against the wall, that encourages arching and all of that. But to find ways of cheating to get a sense of achievement, I find just helps to share that experiences. But it's a constant balance of like how to, how to approach it. But I think constantly being creative around, rather than just thinking this is how you have to go through all this level and doing exactly to get to this trick. It's like, keep being creative about it. And then more people can enjoy it, and we can enjoy it more even when our starting point change. Another thing, this is obvious, but it's using restrictions as a starting point. Many theater exercises and many devising techniques, they're all about putting a restriction and then making people work with that restriction. And that's a way of breaking their habits and creating something fresh and finding new ways of doing things. But if we can take away all the stress and the pain and the bad things around the injury or not being able to use our body in certain ways, could we use that restriction to change and improve our practice and our performance? So a physical rule that we quite often have just as a starting point could be like, okay, you have to hold hands and do this certain routine, but you can't let go of each other's hands. But obviously that could also be that if somebody is struggling with their balance or they're struggling with weight on that side, holding that hand and creating that connection with another person, it can be part of protecting the injury as well. So if you look at the sort of theatre exercise and way that you create, then you can use them to also accommodate for the restrictions that we carry. So for example, we would do things like one person is always in the air. They could be transported by, say we got 6 people and they're transporting one person and passing her on. Now you could do that to somebody who can't walk. There's loads of issues you would have to make sure, where you can and can't touch depending on pain things. But you can adapt so much of what we do. We can actually adapt to people who work, who have different abilities. But and also adapt what we do when there's certain things, certain places we can't put weight on. This is just an example of things that we've done. So break them all, take an existing string and try how do you do it in 2s or how do you do it in 3. So like I said, a move you can't do in 2, you do it in 3s, and suddenly you invented a new thing. one of the things is breaking things down into smaller components. So you have a certain trick and it's amazing, but then you can't do it anymore. What's the next step down? Or break it all the way down. What's the very essence of it? So I was talking with Rachel from Grey Eye and saying like, well, you know, a cartwheel is a cartwheel. How do you teach a cartwheel to somebody who can't at all put weight on their arms? And then we're going like all the way back, what's the essence of it? Well, the absolute minimal essence of, you know, you could say that, you know, that's a smaller component, or you could take the essence of it would just be, you know, the eyes going around. So like, how do you look at the essence of a move and then build it back up again and enjoy the journey? And I use that as a theater exercise. I would, you know, ask somebody to do a, you know, amazing trick, but then like, instead of giving that trick away directly, start from the smallest bit and take it up and then take it back again, or things like that. So it's just, you know, the same way of trying to be creative we could also use when we actually can't do something. I've done shows and research in projects where it's all been about, actually, this is my injury, let's base it around, you know, let's explain that to the audience and make them part of that journey, but I'll talk a little bit about that. Does it make sense? Vaguely? Cool. So then when I was doing this, I thought, well, you know, what's sort of a question, but does how we create good circus, that's like, you know, controversial, but does how we create circus hold the key for how we can deal with injuries, restrictions, disabilities, and different body types? And I was thinking about the different things that, as a director or choreographer, that I try to think of, you know, when building something, and put down these 4 things. There are, you know, loads more, but they made sense for me a couple of nights ago when I was writing this. Manage expectation, so manage expectation of the audience. You know, as a performers, we want to sort of have some control of what they're expecting to see. I'll talk more about each one. Deliver and presentation, innovation, and audience connection. So manage expectation. So the audience expectations will always vary. The audience expectation will vary depending on which venue you're in, and it will vary depending on who you are and what you look like. So, you know, these guys, I don't know if it's the lay guys, it's the muscle guys up there. When they come onto stage, the audience will expect a certain thing, and that is different from when 3 beautiful young slight girls comes on stage. That was a long time ago. You know, they will expect something very different when these sort of jesters come on and do their thing. And, you know, if it's a big man and a small woman, they will expect one thing. When it's people of similar size, they will expect another. However, even if they are not, you know, training acrobatics themselves or that physical themselves, they will see it and they will have certain expectations in their head. And so it's you know, so it's just for us to be aware of that as well. It's like we don't have to try to compete with, they're not going to expect the same level. You can still impress them to do something that's not as technically hard, but because you're starting from a different place, people might be more impressed. That makes sense. And then if you look at traditional circus, it holds various formats to build up and manage expectations. So I normally say, like, if you look at a traditional circus act, you know, they first do a trick. That's, you know, pretty impressive. It's not their best trick, but it's a pretty good one. And it's to catch people's attention, but also to give people an idea that this is the sort of level you're expecting, yeah? Okay? Now we go back a bit, we do another little bits and pieces, and then we build it up again, and then we get to the, like, you know, amazing trick at the end, and the best trick is often put in right there. But that first bit is really to set the audience expectations. You know, if they start like really low, and then, you know, they go like, oh, but then the audience might lose interest. You know, there's just various ways that, like, actually automatically, like, circus always, like, you know, set what the expectation should be. And, you know, if the clown comes in and is clowning around and then suddenly does a backflip, people are like, whoa, I didn't know the clown was going to do that because he's just been fooling around all the time. Whereas if the acrobat runs in and do a backflip, it's like, yeah, all right. You know, the audience will react differently depending on what they're expecting. So you, as a performer, you can be in control of what you're expecting in different ways, and to use that to your benefit depending on what which level you can take yourself to. And the other thing is going against expectations. You know, they love it when you come in and you look like you're not going to be able to do something and you can do it. That's like going back to the first point. Circus is about seeing the impossible. They didn't think you were going to do it. When the bigger base and the smaller flyer, when it's actually the other way around, the smaller flyer then bases the big guy, even if it's a really simple trick, they're like, wow! And they'll be more impressed, even though the trick itself is basic. So it's to remember all those things and not always feel like we have to do just the hardest thing, but there's so many other ways of entertaining or to perform. Going against expectations, when the two muscle guys comes in and they do something really sweet together, it's like, oh, I didn't expect that. But the audience enjoy when you break the expectations. People want to see they didn't expect possible from you, and they really will see you first and make a judgment. So you can, as long as you're aware of what they see, then you can surprise them easier than if you're not aware of what they're seeing. I think the hardest thing as a circus performer is actually managing your own expectations. When you used to be able to do, this level of tricks, and then you got injuries and you can only do this level, you feel like a failure. But actually the audience, they think you're amazing. But for you it's like, well, yeah, but I used to do that. But sometimes you just have to go, okay, I can't do that, so let's, I'm here. So let's develop what this is, and develop that in different ways. But it's nearly like our own expectations that are our worst enemies when we start to work with injuries or restrictions or can't go to the level where we used to be, is at least what I find. The audience still will go, oh, you're amazing. And you go like, I'm broken. I'm not. You used to be able to do this now. They don't care. They don't need to know. So that leads to like the delivery and presentation. Like I say, like if you build up for a trick or if it just comes fluidly, if you really like build it up. I had to put stretch people in here. I don't know how many of you ever saw them. I don't think they're around anymore. But it's these two guys, and they basically go and build up to do this handstand thing on chairs. And they first get to tell the audience they do a little dance with the chairs, and then there's a lot of jokes. They're really good comedians. And the worst thing ever was to be like if you're in a cabaret with them, and we were like on straight after them. They're like, yeah, 10 minutes, and then we'll be out. So you're standing there in the wings, ready to go on. You're like, okay, you've gone to the toilet, you've done, have it all. And then fucking half an hour later, you're like, whatever, come on. Because they keep on, they build it up to the audience. Go like, no, we're not going to do it, no. And they build up the chairs and they go like, whoa, wobbling. And somebody in the audience goes, don't do it. And they're like, oh, no, okay, I won't do it. And you're standing in the wing going, do it, for fuck's sake. But, they got the audience in their hands. And the only bloody tricks, as far as I remember, that they do is this handstand. And, it's pretty impressive. But it's really funny when I was looking for the image then, when I was doing the speech. And I couldn't find a particular good image. It's this guy's hair. And I was like, is that it? Because in my memory, from watching them, I was sure it was like about 8 chairs balancing on each other and it was high. And that's how good they were in managing the expectation and also building it up. And I mean, okay, so it's impressive, but like when you're watching it, you think, oh my God. Because they build it up to the level where when they do it, you're like, yeah. So, even if you just have one trick, even if like out of 10 tricks you can still only do one, you can build up an act just around that trick. So obviously that's a lot about style. Is it about show off or is it overall impression? We worked a lot with just ways in and out, and that the tricks are more like just happening along the way, and then it becomes more movement based and what comes across with that, and the tricks are less, they're still very important, but they're less important as a show off thing. I don't know. Like I said, setting the level. Obviously presentation, design, wrap and context. I mean, you put in more of a story, you put in like, different, there's so many different things we can do with circus. I'm not going to go into that. But your level of skills and what you can do, there's so many things around it, and that's what I mean about the strengths of circus, that we're not there on a square floor in the gymnastic and have to do a series of set of things. We can do a whole variety of things to dress the skills that we have and use our creativity around what we can and can't do. Do you give them the background story? Falling Up, we did a few years ago. It was the first show I directed for Mimbre, and that was based around sort of allowing the audience to know our weaknesses. And we did quite a lot of different research projects on the way where I worked with performers and says, okay, do a minute little thing or more about a body part that you feel really strongly about. Now, nearly everyone did it about an injury. As performers, we feel the strongest, like the bit that takes of our body takes the most attention is the one that's been injured. And then the thing was about explaining that if it was physically or if it was actually talking and giving the story, the act would focus around that body part. Now that was very specific. I'm not saying that would be interesting for all the audience, but then from that we then build a show that was more open. But as performers, I think we often don't want people to know our restrictions or our injuries. And actually, sometimes when you're more human to the audience, when you actually allow them to see what it is you can't do, then they appreciate more the things you can do. So it's nothing. Do we, if you're talking, whatever it is, do you allow them to see the background story? If it's just physical, do you make a whole thing about the fact that actually I can't put any weight on that foot? It all becomes about that. Physical, you can let them know what your restrictions are, and they will sympathize with that and get with that. So are your restrictions invisible or open? That can be a choice that you can actually work to your strengths. And go like, oh, but I don't want them to feel sorry for me. But it's not about that. It's also about their being honest. So innovation. I think the thing with circus is like create new moves, invent, do things. It's about doing what's never, it's not only, but one of the things is do what's never been seen before, surprise the audience, present something, that they can't do. And some of the new circus that's I've seen in the last few years is really weird things. It's circus performers doing things that you go, you trained physically 15 years to do that? But it's brilliant. It's doing, so this guy, I forgot the name, they were doing a sharing at Jackson's Lane. He basically spent 10 minutes just putting clothes pegs into his beard and then onto his eyebrows and then on his neck. And it was just really weird, but absolutely fascinating. It was really just spellbinding. And I mean, he was a juggler, really good juggler. But he was like, well, yeah, I'm done juggling, but just looking for other things to do. And I think being a circus performer, we used to do the things that, like the whole thing of doing things that don't seem possible. That mindset, you can use that, but not only that, I have to do the physically impossible thing. You can use it to create other impossible things. And somehow it still falls within that circus fascination. It's sort of, I think just making things up. I don't know, this balance, I don't even know what he's doing. I just found a photo and thought, that looks really cool. It's the guy from Circus C. When I saw it, he was doing in a big tub, he was balancing the whole way across the stage on bottles, just glass bottles. Just putting one glass bottle. I think he had 3 bottles of them, putting one and going to that, and then taking the other, and then putting that, and then going to that. And it's bloody 10 minutes. It's but it's fascinating. And obviously it needed extreme core, balance, all of those things. But it wasn't like he was doing acrobatics or aerial things, but he did something that you didn't think would be possible to do. I wanted to show you just a video of Claire Cunningham in terms of innovation. I was just really blown away by her show. So that's all coming from a different, for her, well, she can't put weight on her legs, and it's on crutches and variety in wheelchairs. And then creating a whole show around what to do with all these crutches. And just visual concept of all these things. And then how she starts to use them physically. And again, in that show, there is talking, and she's sort of giving a bit of background story and giving what dance and what circus meant for her, and how that gave her the freedom to move around when before she had been really restricted, which is incredibly. It just really connects you to to her story and the background story, and appreciate her physicality. But it's also she's just inventing shit. She can't do things the way that other people do aerial or other people do dance, so she has to invent her own way. And it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. And when you go and see shows and shows and shows, you go, oh, wow, that's totally different from other things. So I think for me, it's just she took, her restrictions and created something amazing out of it that someone else wouldn't have thought of. So it's that thing of like, however pissed off we are about the bits of it that doesn't work. It's like if we can just take, a step back from that. Like I said, not about an acute injury. Take a step back and go, okay, but what can I do out of this? Maybe we create something totally different and more innovative. And then, this sort of said it already. It's like the audience connection, allowing the audience to connect with you, to empathize with you, to identify with you, to feel like they're part of what you're doing. For me, that's any good circus show. But again, like if you're dealing with injuries and restrictions that feel like you can't perform at the height that you would like to be, if you get that connection with the audience, I think that you could perform like a quarter of your skills and they would love you even more. So it's to keep, and it goes back to manage your own expectations. If you can get that, value that as much as value, if you can do whatever, how many somersaults you can do in a row, if you can value that other bit as much to help you to not push your bodies in a way where it doesn't want to be pushed, but to focus. I love what Jammer was saying about, choosing your compromises. So choosing actually, like my body can still do this, this and that. Maybe I could do these things as well, but if I do, I'm really going to wreck it. But do I need to? Is it worth it? Or do I look at these things and go, okay, how do I present them and use my creativity to make them the most beautiful and connect with the audience and make them connect with it? So I think it's just a journey. For me, it's still a journey. But a journey in how you, use your restriction and let it be part of how you create or how you approach something, and maybe you find a totally different story from what you would do otherwise. And then the other thing is of going, okay, I can't do this, but then how can I do it? If there are things that you really want to do, if I can't do it, how can I create a scenario using my creativity where I can do it? For me, if you could complement that with all the amazing, knowledge and techniques and retraining your body and all the things we talked about this morning, I find like it's so fascinating. I think if we keep thinking of like we can do all those things, but it's also about how we approach it in our head when we create a performance, that will make the big difference in how we do. And I also find that when teaching, to teach people to be creative from the start, to not teach sports, you have to get to this level, and then we'll start to choreograph. Like for me, even when as soon as you teach kids, like get them to choreograph really early on, get them to play with it, get them to corrupt the material, make it their own, mix it with what they're interested in. And I was really happy listening to what Will was saying about, just bring in loads of random things, because that's sort of what we do in circus a lot. And but also I think when teaching, that's what I find interesting, is when people can pull in loads of different things and shaking it up and seeing what comes out of it. But to hear that is actually useful from a physical point of view, when I always thought, and especially as director, that's really useful from a creative point of view, I was like, wow, brilliant. That's actually physically will be more beneficial, as well. So this is really, and again, there's no answers there, but I thought like this is how I've been approaching things and how I've been creating things. And like I said, I don't perform anymore, so it's a total fraud. But when teaching people, and now also I direct and choreograph in totally different contexts as well. So I direct circus people, but I also go in and work with in theatre setting, or actually the picture I had I didn't talk about was about when you manage the expectations. This was, I was working on Orfeo at the Roundhouse. There's an opera earlier this year, and this is the main singer. This is Orfeo. The actual, I don't know if you know the myth of Orfeo, but basically in Monteverdi's opera, and he sang through the whole. He's the main singer, the main opera singer. He's amazing, an international star. He sings through the whole show. There was some dance and physicality throughout the show, but he was not that involved in it. And then at the very end of the show, he gets pulled up in these two straps and gets pulled up to the nearly to the top of out through this hole in the stage. And I was asked to do to do just a couple of tricks with him on that strap, to him reaching out to Eurydice as she's being pulled back into hell. And had an hour to create this. And he has never been on straps before. You know, so I had to go like super simple with it. I was like, you know, I have to think about your safety, I have to think about, you know, your body, I think, you know, your lungs, your voice, you know, all this. And just be really efficient. And that, for me, it was like, this is not circus, this is like, you know, so simple what you're doing. But I had to do it within the safety level, especially having the director of the opera house asking me, is this safe? And then having the director of the roundhouse going, are you sure this is safe? And then the director of the show going, is this safe? And I'm like, fuck's sake, it's circus, it's not safe, okay? But, you know, what I taught him was very basic. Now the audience was like, whoa! Because they didn't expect it. Because he'd done the whole show doing this amazing singing. And then suddenly he's got pulled up in the air and does this drop down to reach. And the whole world, you know, went like that. And it was about the expectations. Nobody expected that. And so it really got them. But you know, if it would have been a circus for me, if it would have started out in that strap, they would have been a bit like, yeah, that's a bit tame. You know, so again, just constantly like looking at the setting you're working in and what's enough really in that setting. That's it. We're going to have, I think we're going to have a wrap up, Silvia Fratelli. No?
We've got 3 minutes.
Okay, we got 3 minutes. And then we're going to have a wrap up. So yeah, any questions and thoughts? And please share your.
Just a thought about something you said earlier. I'm sort of talking on behalf of Rick, really. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing some of his stories. But on one of your earlier slides, you mentioned a bit about using disability or injury as a starting point, as a point to develop creativity. And I guess it was an experience that he had a few years ago working with a particular choreographer, and it was a particularly frustrating situation. So I guess this is a bit of a warning story in some respects with regards to that. That he was in a group situation with mixed ability, so disabled and non-disabled people, and they were asking him to do an exercise that he tried it, and you know, he put all his energy into it and gave it a go, and then eventually he just kind of said, well, I can't actually do this. This is physically impossible for me in my capabilities. He's like, you know, I've tried, I cannot do it. And the choreographer kind of came back and sort of went, oh, but it's really interesting from an artistic perspective to like watch you struggle with that. And he was just kind of like, well, screw you, thanks very much. You know? So like, it's one of those interesting things where I think it is very interesting from an artistic perspective to look at someone who moves differently, but to also be careful that you don't then put them in a situation where they where they feel like you're using them as a tool to make things interesting, or where you're pushing them up against a wall, that actually, we use the term slamming them into their disability, like forcing them to quite clearly see what they're not capable of. So really using, you know, like you mentioned it, looking at what you can do and then using that as a point to build from, as opposed to putting someone in a situation where they might feel like,
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's and yes, like it's so interesting to however you try to make it inclusive. There will always be things that you hadn't thought of or hadn't connected with yourself. But you know, things like, you know, in some of the R&Ds we were doing, we said, okay, like to talk about your body parts. That puts the power in the performer's hands to decide what they are talking about or performing, and how they are presenting it. And some people would show their strengths and some their weaknesses. And actually the people who had maybe more serious restrictions would actually focus more on the strength, whereas all the sax performers were like, oh, I can finally tell somebody about my elbow, and he just keeps doing this. You know, but I think constantly putting the power in the performer's hand, which I think is true of any devising. I feel a bit double, you know, when I see some directors who can really push people to a place where they feel really uncomfortable. And I think that's a power, but you have to be, you're still responsible for where you put them and to put them back together again. And yeah, like, is that right? Like, that's not how I work, basically.
That idea of risk as well is interesting to disabled people. When people see a disabled person and they're like, oh, I want to sort of comfortable you and I don't want to like push your boundaries too much. So I think it is really important to push boundaries with disabled people. Yeah, no, I was just saying about pushing boundaries with disabled people as well as, you know, like they have the capability to find their limits as well.
And Claire's story about, like, you know, and well, her performance, but also she also tells a bit of her story through the show. And it's like, you don't have to be on crutches or not being able to use your legs, to identify with how she overcome this like real restrictions and how she put her way through it. I mean, I think the whole audience identifies with that. They're not thinking, oh, I can't identify with that because I can use my, it's like you identify with the essence of it. But yeah, it's about finding how can you have the power of people doing that essence rather than pushing them in a way where, they're being looked at rather than being in control of it. But I think that goes for any performance, yeah.
Having being a bass myself and working with a partner, I would be kind of worried for the other person as well, and I'm wondering if you'd have any experienced tips in working with a group, and particularly for your trio, if you've had to take time out and how that's affected you as a group, and whether there's things that you wish you could have done better.
I think it's really hard, for any troop situation that you train in. And yes, we had injuries. I had an operation at some point. We had pregnancy. My first pregnancy, I got really sick in the beginning of it. I sort of knew that once I had a baby, I would have to take out. But I had to take out 3 months in my pregnancy, 5 months of being lying in bed throwing up. It's like that wasn't expected. And to start with, we trained so close. That trio, that when one of us was away, not only was it that we didn't have somebody else that we could put in there, we didn't know what the hell to do when it was just one or two of us. It's like I could go to an audition as a trio and be like, really amazing. If I come to an audition on my own, I thought, oh no, I can't do that. No, I can't do that. I can't do that. I think it's super hard. I mean, again, it's about having backups. Now as a company, we work with many performers, and since we've started to expanding who we work with, we also start to bring up, have a collective of performers that we have worked with, and to some extent that might mean that if somebody gets injured, there are other people we can bring in on, without having to train them up from scratch. But I think it goes for any of those situations that it's super hard. We put ourselves in a situation where we're incredibly reliant on somebody else, which makes it even more important to look at how each other's training and to support ourselves to get better, not only in exactly for that technique, but how, are you doing that, then actually you're not going to be my partner for as long as if you're doing it with a better technique. So to do that journey together and really look at that. And so what Silvia was saying in the beginning, we've done different things as a company, trying to look at that longevity and how we look after performers. And that's not just because we are nice people. It's, economically really worth it to look at what's your weaknesses before you go into production and tour. Because if we can address those weaknesses, and so we did screening and Lab and dance science, who will talk tomorrow, we did a dance screening with some performer, and also we do also screening with Jamie at the beginning of rehearsal period, production period, and then going into tour, to see what is the things that might become an injury. And if we look at it beforehand, that's way better and cost effective, even though that session, that is expensive, and but as a performer and as a company, there's such, there isn't that much money, but that is an investment that is worth, because if it turns into having turned down gigs or interrupted tour, that's so much more expensive. But yeah, I was finding it's been like Will was saying, do a whole lot of other things, have something else to fall back up, be an amazing photographer, and then you can go out and take photos when you can't. It's really hard, but yeah, it's having I don't know, I didn't have a backup. I mean, I do, but when we're working as a trio, it wasn't like I went oh yeah, if you're not available, I'm just going to go and do this thing instead. As a search performance, you have to invest yourself fully into it, and it feels like you're going all or nothing, and I don't know the answer to what's in between that.
Well, you helped quite a lot, thank you very much.
Do you want to wrap up today?